Good day and welcome into the program, everyone. It's time for the Power Grid, Footballguys.com video show, and, of course, audio podcast on the Audible feed as well. I'm your host, Cecil Lammy, joined by the best and brightest minds in all of fantasy football when it comes to daily fantasy or season-long fantasy. We got a great crew here and a special guest this week. I'd like to welcome into the show Dan Hindery. Dan, good day. Welcome in, man. What's up?
Not much. Looking forward to this week. I really like how it's setting up. I like going with the cheap running backs, the expensive wide receivers. So it's going to be my kind of week, I think.
Yeah, and it seems like a real good week. Dan, do you feel we're getting a better feel? Like here we are week 7, like we're already a month and a half in. You kind of know where to shoot for, what to look for?
Yeah, we're starting to see some teams that you can go after them every week, whether it's San Francisco, Detroit, New Orleans, and kind of feeling more confident in the stats that we're using too. So, yeah, it's where we're starting to get the sharper players have more of an advantage at this point in the season.
Well, as we go around the room, Devin Knotts, Jeff Pasquino, John Lee, and Austin Lee joining the program as well. And, John, you have returned not only with some new opinions on what wine is your favorite, but also you've returned with an WFFC seat. Congratulations, John.
Thank you. It's been long overdue in my eyes. I wish I could win one every week. It's been a while, but it was, it was a sweat. It was, it aged me at least 2 years in about 2 hours on Sunday night.
What got it done for you? What was the lineup? What was your big push last week? What put you over the top?
So I did a double stack, or what we call a super stack, with Drew Brees, Coby Fleener, and Michael Thomas. And having those 2 cheap receivers in there allowed me to spend up elsewhere. So I fit in LaShawn McCoy, his 3-touchdown day. I had Odell Beckham doing his thing. And, just that combination there really set me to the top. I still had a heart-wrenching session with Nick Novak, a kicker, and we all know how on this show I love kickers. So it was touch and go for a while, but we made it through. We'll be heading down to Palos Verdes, somewhere in Los Angeles, in December to play for $1 million, and I'm way excited about doing so.
Do you have an Odell Beckham jersey yet?
I should, because he's won me a lot of money over the years.
Yeah,
that might be on my list, Evan.
I think that might be a Vegas gift from all of us to John. Or, well, if he wins, then he can give us whatever gift he wants to. Raise your hand if you've met Joe Montana or are going to meet Joe Montana. Look at that. Look at that. We now have 3 represented on this panel that will meet Joe Montana. Let's jump into the news and notes around the National Football League. Pasquino, we're starting with you. And starting with Landry Jones I said it on the recap show last week, in between cuss words. And yes, Joe Bryant did email me about that. Sorry, Joe. Landry Jones is slappy. He's a full-on slappy. I'm so downgrading Antonio Brown. Maybe not Le'Veon Bell, but maybe. And maybe in DFS because that price is still going to be high. Pasquino, how do fantasy owners and DFS players look at this Pittsburgh team against New England with Landry Jones at QB?
Well, I think this is a total fade pretty much for Pittsburgh, especially on FanDuel where the prices don't adjust very quickly. So Antonio Brown's way out of play. Maybe Bell consideration, but given everything else that's going on in the news this week, I think all Pittsburgh is gone for me this week.
All Pittsburgh. Austin, I didn't see the green or the red. Are you thinking?
I think that if you're going to go Pittsburgh, you're doing it in a GPP to try to get some low-owned guys. If you want to get really crazy, we're going to talk about stacks a little bit later, and I'm not saying this is one of my favorites, but if you want to go for a really low-owned stack, you get Jones and you pair him with Brown, and you just roll into that GPP with those guys.
I think Landry Jones just threw another interception.
Landry Jones can't play dead in a Western. And on the flip side of that, Austin, to throw it back to you, the New England side, I mean, it's basically – we saw what Miami did, so get James White in. What do you think of Hogan? What do you think of Edelman there? Your thoughts?
I think that you're going to lean more on the tight ends and James White here. LeGarrette Blount is going to be a little hit or miss from game to game. I don't like trying to predict which game he's going to hit with Brady back here. But I think going Gronk this week, since there is some salary relief options, and then potentially going back to Martellus Bennett again this week, even though he had a bit of a down week last week, I'm not so keen on those wide receivers yet. So I'm kind of a little more gun shy with those guys, especially for cash.
Well, let's get through another top story, Tampa Bay at San Francisco. And Devin, I want to throw it to you because I love picking your brain about college football players. We remember Mike Davis the year before he came out. He looked like one of the best running backs in the country. He was. And then his final year at South Carolina, he looked terrible, bad. It was like Jadeveon Clowney taking games off or whatever you want to say there. But now with Carlos Hyde out, of course, Colin Kaepernick in at quarterback, you're going to have Davis with the larger role, according to reports, and then Sean Drone mixing in as well. Is there anything here for DFS players, Devin?
As you mentioned, Mike Davis he had a great year before entering the NFL. His last year in college was poor, that whole team. Something was going on after the Marcus Lattimore injury where it seemed like none of them really wanted to play. They just wanted to get the money and not get hurt. But the problem is that Mike Davis hasn't had a lot of opportunities, but he really hasn't shown really anything to get excited about. The guy on the other side of the ball, Jacquizz Rodgers, is who I'm targeting in this game. 35 touches last week with Doug Martin out. And if going back to college, he was a prolific pass catcher, which we saw that last week with the 5 receptions as well.
Yeah, and we've been kind of waiting. I see Austin put up the green. Dan, I'm going to toss it to you about Jacquizz Rodgers. We've been waiting for him to be Darren Sproles-like because that's kind of how he's built. It's been a while, but you saw Tampa Bay with that recommitment to the ground game. No Vincent Jackson, maybe a little bit more of Humphreys, whatever, some Cameron Brate, obviously lots of Mike Evans. But your thoughts on a cheap running back in Jacquizz Rodgers this week, Dan?
Yeah, I think he's the must-play guy this week, maybe along with Gillislee. Just everything sets up perfectly for him. He's going to get extra snaps because San Francisco plays so fast. Their run defense has been awful since Navarro Bowman went down. They're giving up 170 yards a game. I think they gave up 312 yards last week to Buffalo. And the nice thing about Rodgers, like you mentioned, he also gets work in the pass game. He had 5 catches last week. So I think he just checks all the boxes for me. And 4,300 on DraftKings, 5,600, I believe, on FanDuel. I think you have to play him.
Yeah, got to play him. And you mentioned there quickly on Gillislee, of course, we're waiting to see what the official report is. Dan, just let our viewing audience and our listening audience, this will come out on Friday, let them know what we know as we record here on Thursday night about LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, so Josina Anderson, the ESPN reporter, tweeted today that she's heard that McCoy's out. Everything is pointing towards him being out, but it isn't official yet. And I think we're officially going to say it's going to be a game time decision. But I think it's one of those things where it's at least 90% that he's out. So the way I'm probably going to play it is I'll have Gillislee in my lineups, but then kind of have a backup lineup just in case you get the unexpected news on Sunday morning. So that's kind of how I'm playing it.
Emergency move in case you need to. Let's throw this one to John Lee, of course, as we talk about the Jets and Baltimore. It's Geno Smith in. It's Matt Forte banged up. I guess it's as much Brandon Marshall as you possibly can take. But who's going to get more touchdowns, the Ravens defense or the passing game of the Jets? What are your thoughts? This could be a very weird game, maybe not a fantasy-worthy game for DFS, John, or do you believe opposite? Do you believe maybe there's some gold to be mined here?
No, I mean, I legitimately think there is a little bit of gold to be mined here. You know, it's different than season long, where season long you would really not consider going with a guy like Geno Smith, but it's all based on value in daily. And so, you know, he's dirt cheap across the industry. I think he's min price on both of the sites or both of the major sites and even on some of the secondary sites. And he's got a matchup that favors the Baltimore Ravens. It favors him because of the Baltimore Ravens pass defense. All these signs going up are distracting me. For those of you who are I'm stumbling, I'm seeing lots of red and green, and I'm thinking, what are they thinking? I'll finish my thought here and say that this is actually a really good spot for him because Baltimore has been tremendous against the rush all season. They're allowing like 3.3 yards per carry. No team in the NFL has allowed less yardage on the ground, yet they continue to get torched through the air. They have a coverage cornerback in Jacquizz Wright who is getting burned week after week. And we know that Brandon Marshall, is going to see at least half of his routes against Jacquizz Wright. This is a situation where I think you can get both of those guys into your cash game lineups if you want to, and probably be okay, despite the fact that Geno hasn't played in a considerable amount of time. He was much improved his second year over his rookie year, and at a minimum price, I think that you can take a chance on him if you feel the need to do so. And I think this week there might be enough value at the running back where you don't have to do that, but if you want to diversify, you can.
John, I will tell you that's not exactly a ringing endorsement. You don't want that on the billboard. John Lee says start Geno Smith. Quote, "You'll probably be okay." Devin was the first one with the red, man. Devin, Jeff, Dan, and we're all going to jump in here. Let's start with Jeff at the bottom. Jeff, you're putting up the red on Geno.
Yeah, I think there's enough value at other spots that you don't need to do this. And as we've shown in our books that, when they dig into the data, no position gets more points per dollar than quarterback. So it makes sense to spend up. It's usually a safer move. If you have value elsewhere, you want to play it, say, in cash games, obviously I'm talking about here, but you want to spend up on a more stable quarterback. And there's lots of good quarterbacks this week. So I don't really see any reason why with cap space opening up with these secondary backs being made available to start, you don't need to go down on quarterback. I'll mention there is value elsewhere in this game I do see, but I'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that as we go through position by position. Dan, you said no to Geno as well.
Yeah, I think it's especially clear on DraftKings because there's so many other cheap quarterbacks where you only have to go up an extra 1,000 or so to get Kirk Cousins, Blake Bortles, all these guys who are better players, better matchups. I think there's a little bit better case on FanDuel, but even there's so much value at running back that I don't think this is the week to do it. I think the one thing is if you're dead set on playing Gronkowski in your cash game lineup on FanDuel, then maybe there's a case for Geno, because I think that's the one position where you can still fit in 2 good running backs with the value and 3 top wide receivers without having to go to Geno unless you want to play Gronk. So I guess if you're dead set on Gronk, I think you can justify Geno on FanDuel, but even there, I don't think you have to do it because there's enough value at tight end that you don't have to go there.
I don't want to beat this dead horse with Geno, but I imagine if this was pro wrestling, fellas, and we're all in the ring battling, you hear the theme music. It's probably the Ohio State fight song. And here comes Devin Knotts running in with the chair. Like, that's who Devin is. So I'm expecting some sort of big hit from Devin Knotts on Geno Smith.
Well, here's the problem. So from a cash game perspective, can you really trust Geno Smith? He has 2 career, 2 touchdown or more games. He threw as many interceptions as he did touchdowns in the last season that we saw he was a starter. He doesn't really run the ball. So he only had 230 yards rushing. So I think a lot of people think he runs the ball more than what he truly does. And then Brandon Marshall had the worst career year as a Jet with Geno Smith as a quarterback. So to me, it's not really a situation, and I know it's 2 years old now, but he's going to be higher owned in GPPs than he really should be. And from a cash game perspective, his floor isn't high enough to trust him. We've seen it with Derek Anderson. We've seen it with Dak Prescott week 1. It seems like every time that the public or everyone is on a low-priced quarterback that they fail. So I've been burned by Derek Anderson. I can't go back to Geno Smith. I just don't think that his floor is 190 yards and a touchdown, and that's not good enough for the price when you have guys like Matt Ryan and Tom Brady who could throw 300 plus with 3+ touchdowns. So I think going cheap at other positions is the way to go.
John, you gave me the look like you better get to talk here.
Well, I just want one statement. I actually don't disagree with that, although I will point out if he throws for 190 yards and a touchdown, he basically reaches value. But I'll say this. With these three opinions that we just heard, if I see these guys playing anything but the Baltimore defense on Sunday, I'm going to call them out as liars and hypocrites because there's no way the Jets are going to run the ball against that defense.
And Landry Jones just threw another interception.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Austin, you've been green and red in that segment. I'm confused.
Yeah, so here's the situation. I would want to play Geno on FanDuel, especially if Joe Flacco is out of this game. It's possible that Ryan Mallett is going to start for Baltimore this week. I know that's a little iffy, but if Mallett starts, then Smith becomes more interesting to me in this game because I think it's going to be a terrible, horrible game where Geno gets more opportunities to right his mistakes. But yeah, it's a risky move.
Pasquino, super quick. I want to know what's the Baltimore buzz on Flacco. Any sort of sports talk out. And we know there's nothing like local sports talk. It's ass crack and ball sack and the mayhem in the AM, but what's the Baltimore buzz about Flacco, Jeff?
They're still behind him, and it's still pretty light as far as they're very tight-lipped in Baltimore, more than even New England. They really don't give any information on injuries. They're very tight with the press, so they don't give out much injury notes. So you really have to take it at face value on who's practicing and who's not because they don't give out much information whatsoever. So I don't want to add to speculation because that's all it really is on the talk radio right now.
It's a Jets and Ravens show, but Dan, tie a bow on this thing so we can go to Vegas.
Yeah, I would say the one thing to watch in that game where maybe I like Geno and Brandon Marshall a little more is Jimmy Smith is out with a concussion, and it's not sure if he's going to be back. And he's by far the Ravens' best corner. He's having a good year. And he actually matches up pretty well with Brandon Marshall because he's big, 6'2", 210. So I think there's a little bit more into Geno, and maybe more so for Brandon Marshall. It's going to depend on whether Jimmy Smith gets through concussion protocol this week.
Well, let's go to Vegas and talk about what Las Vegas is telling us for DFS purposes. And, John, let's go ahead and start with you. What's Vegas telling you this week, man?
A lot of scoring in store for us this weekend. I think of all the weeks, we're through 6 complete weeks and heading into number 7 here. And this is probably the highest mean average of Vegas totals that we've seen all season. We've got at least a handful of games that have a Vegas total at 50 or above, and I think the pinnacle of which is the San Diego game where they're coming into Atlanta, and we'll get 2 very bad defenses facing one another with 2 pretty decent offenses. So you're going to want to try to game stack that game where possible because there's going to be a lot of fantasy goodness to be had there.
Austin, what's Vegas telling you?
Like John said, lots of scoring. The teams that I'm looking at here to get plays on, Kansas City's running game, I think is going to really have a field day this weekend. I like Spencer Ware in that game. Even Jamal Charles, both of them could have a good day in this game against New Orleans. Their implied total is 28.5 points. They are second on the board behind Atlanta in terms of team points. So I like both sides of the ball, both teams in that game, but mostly Kansas City's running game.
Devin, what about you in Vegas? You got 3 50-plus point games on the main slate.
Yeah, I'm going to go away from one of the 50-plus games. The one that kind of surprises me a little bit is Tennessee. I don't think too many people are talking about them, and a lot of people were burned by Delaney Walker last week. Their implied total is 25.5 points. So you can get a lot of value there. DeMarco Murray, as we saw Lamar Miller tear up the Colts defense last week. So I think that they're a sneaky play that not a lot of people are talking about. The one caution about the Chargers and the Falcons, both teams are going west to east. So the Falcons were in Seattle last week. I know that the Vegas over-under is high, but typically whenever teams go west to east, they do struggle a little bit. So that's the only caution that I have there.
Pasquino doesn't have any caution when it comes to Atlanta, San Diego. What's up, Jeff?
That's not pertinent unless it's a 1 p.m. kickoff, because they've done studies on this, and it's really about the biological clock, and not until get to the biology here. But a 4 p.m. kick's a lot different than a 1 p.m. kick, so I'm not worried about a West Coast team going for a 4 p.m. kick. As far as the other Vegas games, I like looking at some of the games that are high on that list for the point totals, but are going to be closer, at least according to Vegas. And I like Detroit, Washington. I think there's going to be a lot of fancy value there. You just have to pick out where it's going to come from. And Oakland and Jacksonville. I think both those games have the potential to be shootouts. And, of course, I always like to look at the lower end to find my defenses. And Cleveland apparently is still terrible in the eyes of Vegas and most of the rest of the world.
Dan, what is Vegas telling you this week?
Yeah, I think you guys hit on a lot of them. I think Devontae Freeman in Atlanta is interesting. He's been getting a ton of touches inside the 10-yard line, and he's pretty cheap. He's also out-touched Tevin Coleman every game. I think the New England is interesting. I think an interesting stack there is Tom Brady and the Patriots defense, because in terms of game flow, that game could go, I think, one of two ways. One, Pittsburgh kind of just runs the ball a bunch and is able to keep it somewhat close, and they don't, they ran it 51% of the time when Roethlisberger was out last year, which doesn't necessarily set up for a very good game for the Pats D, just a lot of kind of punting and low scoring. But if New England jumps all over them, then they end up having to pass a lot with Landry Jones. So that's an interesting stack where New England has a high team total. And if they do score 28 like Vegas expects, or 35, 40, then all of a sudden Pittsburgh has to throw a bunch with Landry Jones, and that's where you get your big defensive game too.
Well, speaking of quarterbacks, let's actually talk about some good quarterbacks. And as we move on to our positional breakdowns, again, chalk, cash, GPP, or fade. Devin, you get to start QBs this week. Who do you like?
Tom Brady. It's hard not to. I'll take the obvious one off the board. Brady is, ever since he's come back, he's looked in mid-season form. He's going up against a Pittsburgh defense secondary that is one of the worst in the league. It's on the road, which isn't ideal for Brady, but I think that he can basically set the score that he wants to put up against Pittsburgh this week. He's going to have, as I've mentioned a couple times throughout this show, Landry Jones throws a lot of interceptions. We've seen it in his limited action, and that could set up for some very good field position for Brady. And then pairing him, as we'll get to tight ends later, but pairing him with Gronkowski, who appears to be close, if not 100% healthy this week, is a direction that I'll be going.
Dan, how about you in quarterbacks in week 7?
There's a lot of, I'll start with Matt Ryan. I think he's been a lot better at home. They have the huge point total. That just sets up really well for him. And he's a little bit cheaper than Brady. And I'm not sure if, for whatever reason, he's still – I think maybe this might be the week where his ownership's up a little bit. But he's flown so far under the radar in GPPs all season. So I wonder if even though he's in probably a little bit better spot than Brady in a game that has more shootout potential, I wonder if Brady might actually still be higher owned than Matt Ryan.
Austin with the green and the red there. What are your quarterback thoughts?
No, I love Matt Ryan. I think that Matt Ryan will actually be higher owned this week. I think that I think you're right. He has been flying under the radar a bit, but I think this is finally the matchup where people jump all over him in terms of ownership. Tom Brady will be well owned as well, but Ryan will be higher owned, I think. I think Andy Dalton on DraftKings is especially cheap. He's $6,000 over there, and I think that's a guy you really have to take a long look at if you're playing on DraftKings. And then I like Blake Bortles going up against Oakland. Oakland's allowed 319 passing yards per game. That's most in the league. And so Bortles has been a bit up and down, but I like Bortles a lot in GPPs this week.
Using a little bit more of Marquise Lee there. We'll talk more about that Jacksonville game. Quickly, Austin, what's the latest we have on Tyler Eifert? Fully participated on Thursday, looking like he's going to play. That plays into your Dalton take.
Yeah, and this is interesting to watch because the Cleveland matchup is great for tight ends. They've allowed the second most normalized fantasy points to tight ends. So it's tricky, though. You don't know if Eifert's going to get a full workload here. So I like him as a GPP play in case he gets a full workload, but I'm not really willing to go cash in case his conditioning isn't there or they put him on a snap count.
Well, let's move to the running back position. And, John, you get to start us out in this segment. And I want to know, I mean, it was looking for a little bit like maybe Zach Zenner would be a cheaper running back to fill in so you could pay up at other positions. Now, maybe Theo Riddick can actually practice. Maybe Dwayne Washington can actually practice. So there's questions there. Jacquizz, and I know how to pronounce his damn name now because he ran it up so much against my beloved Steelers. And then, of course, David Johnson, continued success against the tough Seattle D. John, kick us off here on running backs.
Yeah, I think there's a number of teams this week that have excellent running matchups against poor rush defenses, and a number of them, including the Detroit Lions, the running back situation is so murky that it's difficult to read and almost not worth taking the chance on those guys because they might only get a dozen carries at most. And so, looking into that Detroit situation specifically, you've got four guys there because now we have Justin Forsett in the mix. I mean, it's really difficult to know what they're going to do. And so for that reason, I'm staying away from them entirely. I think that the way to go this week and the way that, quite frankly, 50 to 70% of the people are going to go at running back position is going with Mike Gillislee filling in for Shady McCoy, assuming that happens, of course. And then secondarily to that, Jacquizz Rodgers, who should see a boatload of carries against a 49ers defense that I think that the six of us could run through some of the holes that they've been allowing this preseason. All right, just me. See a lot of red up.
Well, see, here's the thing, John. You're too tall to be a running back. I would put you more at either a pass rushing defensive end or as like a red zone specialist tight end. I want that big body near the goal line.
That's fair enough. All right, so I'll settle. Chicks dig touchdowns, so I want to be on offense.
Okay, and I'm built like Lindell White, so I'll tote the rock. Jeff, you're up next, and you talk about Lindell's very svelte now, I might add, and smells like the sweetest Jiva every time you're around him. Anyway, Pasquino, you're up to talk about running backs. He's looking at me like, oh, my God.
I don't sort my backs by smell, so we're not going to go there.
Yeah, that's Lendale's here. Let's talk about these running backs and these – it's Colorado, baby. Let's talk about these running backs and get this show quickly back on track. Pasquino, you're up.
Well, John Hill and the two cash guys, I think you're going to be looking at Buffalo right there, and then you got you've got the Tampa Bay running back situation with Rodgers. Those are going to be your two cash games, but I think you got to look at DeMarco Murray. I think he's got a great matchup as well this week. So if you want to kind of mix it up and you want to kind of temper expectations on cash games, I'm probably going to go both those cheaper guys if I can't find value elsewhere. But the nice way to play a GPP would take one of them and put in a stud running back like Murray to balance it out. But there's a couple other guys I would look like for GPPs. I like what David Johnson did against the Jets last week. I told you I mentioned the Ravens game again. Flacco's injured. West has looked good the last 2 weeks. I think that West could actually have a very good game against the Jets this week. So that's one GPP play I'm really looking at.
Dan, you flashed the red, man. What's up? Give us some running back love.
I actually thought he was going with David Johnson. I actually kind of agree with West. David Johnson's probably my big fade this week, though. I just hate that matchup against Seattle. They've held Arizona to 6 points or less 3 of the 4 times they played them. Number one rush D. Team total is only 22 points for the Cardinals. It just seems like a really bad spot. But he's had so many big games the last few weeks that I think people are still going to be on David Johnson. And I think that's a matchup to avoid this week.
Well, let's move on to the wide receiver position. And Devin, you are up in this one. And again, kind of like with Pasquino, I want that local take, man. What's going on with Terrell Pryor there? What's kind of the buzz there? Did not participate on Thursday. Playing at Cincinnati, obviously a big part of what they do. What's my man and Denver born, Aaron Goldhammer? What are people out in Cleveland talking about in this Pryor situation? What's the buzz there? Give us some wide receiver love here, Devin.
Yeah, it sounded like Pryor is on the doubtful side of questionable. Gene Bramwell said this morning that he's projecting him to be out for this game. The problem is, who else do the Browns have? I mean, Corey Coleman's hurt. Terrell Pryor, if he misses, maybe
Ricardo Lewis.
Maybe Ricardo Lewis, but I mean, Ricardo Lewis isn't really a guy who I want to trust. He's had 5+ targets in each of his last 3 games, had 9 last week, and he's still relatively minimum price. So maybe Ricardo Lewis is a deep GPP play. I just have a hard time trusting this Browns offense. I know Cody Kessler's looked okay. He's looked average, which is better than most Browns quarterbacks over the last 15 years. But it's not a direction that I want to go.
It is interesting with Cody Kessler there. It's like when we found out that Bill Clinton could play the saxophone when he was president. It's like, oh, my God, if he can speak Spanish, I'll wet myself. John, let's talk about these wide receivers and, off the Cleveland situation, anywhere you want, chalk, cash, GPP, fade. What are your thoughts on wide receiver, John?
I'm just going to throw this out there. The one wide receiver I really want to play now because of a tweet I saw about 45 minutes ago. You're not going to believe this, but Odell Beckham. I love Odell Beckham. This is actually a really good matchup for him against the Rams secondary that's been getting burnt all year long. But now Kimberly Jones from the NFL Network is reporting that he might kick field goals this weekend because of the Josh Brown scenario. And I want to have a piece of those field goals if he kicks field goals in London. It's like the perfect chemistry of everything I have.
Wait, what happened to the hating kickers, John?
No, I'm going to like them this week.
Well, he does love that kicker's net now. So
he's going Otto Graham on us now.
Yeah.
As far as I know, that if he kicks field goals, I think he gets those points. But I'll make sure of that. And, if he ends up in my article this weekend, I'll be sure to tell all the readers. But, in all seriousness, he does have a good matchup. I know that it's that early game and you have to play a special slate and that whole thing. So it's worth mentioning to anybody that's listening or watching that is the case. But he does have an excellent matchup. And I will say that the other big chalk guy this week is going to be Mike Evans, who could see 15 to 20 targets with Vincent Jackson leaving in a great matchup. So he's another guy that you should be looking at.
Yeah, definitely 1,000%. Austin, I'm seeing a lot of green there, a lot of smiles and talking about ODB. I want to also bring up Golden Tate. Did they finally figure out something? As we talk about the problems with running back, and it kind of makes sense, right? And as we saw with Green Bay and their running back situation last week, of course, playing on Thursday night this week. But when Detroit's not running the ball or there's questions there, just use Golden Tate to supplement what you're not getting from your rushing attack, Austin. It seems like maybe he's back on track.
I think that's exactly it. I think as long as Theo Riddick is out, I think that Golden Tate is a viable play. I think when Theo Riddick comes back, I think you have to wait and see how that plays out a little bit. I would be less excited about using Tate if Riddick is back. And I think that ODB is John's Dennis Pitta. I think he
absolutely.
It's official. I think you guys
need the frosted tips, John. You need to change the hairdo, get the frosted tips. Like
I tell you what, if he wins me $1 million in December, I will have frosted tips for all of you.
Yes.
You heard it here. I will put these on and I will wear them to my professional meetings, my PhD level meetings, frosted tips, if he wins me $1 million.
Big goatee.
You're bringing the giant check with you.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's move on to the tight end section of the program. Dan, you're going to start us off in this one. And, we're waiting on Tyler Eifert. It looks like he's going to be ready to go. It looks like Jack Doyle is going to be the top guy in Indy. I'm contractually obligated to say it that way. We can discuss Hunter Henry. We can talk about Jordan Reed, and maybe it's Vernon Davis this week. Dan, kick us off here on tight ends.
Yeah, I'm interested in Gary Barnidge, actually, especially if Terrell Pryor's out. I mean, those targets are going to have to go somewhere. The Browns are 10-point underdogs, too, so in terms of game script, it sets up pretty well. So he's a guy who I think is interesting, especially on DraftKings. He's only 3,300. You just don't know where else those targets are going to go. I mean, I think Ricardo Lewis gets some, maybe Andrew Hawkins and Duke Johnson get a few. But I'm all about paying up for the top wide receivers this week. So I'm trying to save as much money as possible at tight end. Dennis Pitta is another one who is in a pretty good matchup because, as we talked about, the Jets, you generally have to throw a bunch. So that's another place where I'm looking to go to pay down at tight end.
Now, I want to caution you, Dan, that if you say Dennis Pitta's name 3 times in a row, Jeff Pasquino magically appears on your lap. So be careful with that. Pasquino, you're up on tight ends, baby.
Well, when I was doing my research for this week, the first guy I put down was Hunter Henry. because just the matchup against Atlanta, that's the guy I'm looking at. Everybody's on Gronk. Everybody's on these, that's the thing about this week. With all the injury news, everybody looks at the most recent mentions. Hunter Henry was my top guy coming in. I'm not moving off of him because he's the number one tight end in that game. It's the highest scoring game, and he's going to see a ton of targets against a bad defense. I don't see any reason to move off of Hunter Henry whatsoever.
Devin, on tight ends, any Cameron Brate love? What are your thoughts here on tight ends this week?
Yeah. On DraftKings, it's interesting because Gronkowski is only 7,200. So going with a 2 tight end set, I mean, Gronkowski's in the price of the Brandon Cooks and Brandon Marshall and in those second-tier wide receivers. But what he's done over the last 2 weeks with 100 yards plus in each of those games, putting him in the flex position and then going with a Hunter Henry or a Gary Barnidge is an interesting play. It's going to differentiate yourself from just having Gronkowski, who will be popular this week. It's just a way to get a cheaper elite wide receiver really in the flex position than what he should be.
Devin, you were shaking your head when I mentioned Jack Doyle. Why?
I don't know if it was shaking my head. I was more shaking it at your pronunciation of Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle is just, I mean, if he finds the end zone, great. But the consistency isn't necessarily there. He's only had 4 targets in his last 2 games. So I can't buy into Jack Doyle.
He's saying it regularly. And by the way, Colts listeners and Colts fans, help me out here, but I believe it was Bob Laney, and that, yes, that is the way you pronounce his name. It's only one M. Had said that on a Doyle touchdown earlier in the year. So it's kind of the way we say it on the show, Devin. I'm just saying. Let's move on. Give me a green if you want to talk defense and kickers. Give me a red if you don't, because I know kicker talk is always, is John going to be red or is John going to be green? John's red. I'm shocked. John returns to the lineup. He's like, nah, kickers. Okay, so it's green all the way down here. Let's start with Devin. Back to you. Defense kickers.
Yeah, John already mentioned his potential kicker, so that met his quota for the year with Odell Beckham. Keep an eye on John's post to see if he is actually eligible. I'll let John do the digging there. Matt Bryant, I say it every week, but it's the highest projected game of the week. So I want a kicker, or I want some action in that game. Indoors, which is always a plus for kickers, and a guy who's at his home stadium, which is always a plus. From a defense side, I've mentioned it probably 4 times in this show. New England is the defense that I'm going with. Jones has thrown 4 interceptions and I think 110 career passes. So, and he threw 4 interceptions in a preseason game this year. So he likes throwing the ball to the other team. For whatever reason, he can't differentiate what team he's on. So I expect to have a few turnovers from New England this week. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you.
Dan, defense and kickers. What do you got?
I think defense, I think Denver's interesting. Houston is one of the worst teams in terms of DVOA. You have the whole storyline with Osweiler coming back, and just the pass rush on a pretty poor offensive line. I think that's an interesting one. And I even kind of like Seattle a little bit on the road if you can pay up to get there. Arizona has given up some big games to opposing defenses. Carson Palmer hasn't been practicing. And like I said, the Seattle just seems to have Arizona's number for the most part in recent years, and their defense especially has been able to make some plays against Carson Palmer. So those are some of the defense I'm looking at.
One quick thing about the Denver's defense, Brandon Marshall, the linebacker, has said that the Broncos defense wants to kill Brock Osweiler. So there's a little bit of animosity there that he left them and has left them barren at the quarterback position.
Well, you won't be surprised, Devin. I'm the one that asked him that question.
There you go.
And in talking to all the defenders this week, there seems to be a bitterness about him not coming to the ring ceremony. The White House thing is whatever. I mean, he said he had an OTA to attend instead of go meet the president. But not going to the ring ceremony is what most defenders will say. Shane Ray said that it's a different system, but it's the same old Brock. We know how to get to him. So I'm expecting a bad night for the Texans passing game on Monday Night Football. Pasquino, you're all about defenses and kicker. What do you got this week?
Well, I usually let Devin take care of the Atlanta kicker, but I think the other game you got to point at is Denver. I think you got McManus in elevation. I think that's always a plus. You can get 5 points for a 50-yarder. It's always in play. And I also like Mike Nugent. I think that Cincinnati can kick a lot of field goals late with the lead against Cleveland. On defense, I think one that's going to get overlooked this week and should not be is Minnesota. They cost a little bit more. The offensive line for Philadelphia is banged up because of Lane Johnson's suspension. They have a revolving door now in that spot, and Minnesota's coming off of a bye. So you're going to have low ownership, and they're going to be busting through that line and getting right after a rookie quarterback in St. Bradford's return to Philadelphia.
John, were you shaking your head on Minnesota or no?
Oh, no, I was saying I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet because Lane Johnson, when he was out last week, Big V and his replacement, I talked about this on the show last night with Austin. He gave up 2 sacks, a quarterback hit, and a quarterback hurry in his inaugural game, and they're playing a much better defense this week in the form of the Vikings. So I love that call.
Does anyone know how to pronounce his name? Seriously, like nobody.
Vaitai is how you pronounce the last name.
Is that it? Okay. Yeah. Well, there's
won't matter in a few weeks when he's cut.
Right. There's turnstiles at the subway that put up more of a fight. Let's move on from that and talk about stacks this week and go around the ring. Everyone gets a turn. Austin, you're up first with your favorite stacks in week 7.
I think there's several high-owned stacks that are going to be pretty obvious at the top of the implied team totals. If you want to differentiate yourself a little bit, instead of going Matt Ryan on the side of the Atlanta-San Diego game, you could try to figure out who Phillip Rivers is going to throw the ball to and try to stack him. I think it's going to be way lower owned because it's a little fuzzier as to who exactly his top target's going to be. But I like stacking him with Hunter Henry or Tyrell Williams. Those are the guys that I would choose on the San Diego side.
All right, Dan, you get to talk some stacks, some of your favorites for this week.
Yeah, I think this is another one that's going to be popular, but Jameis Winston with Mike Evans. I think that'll especially – the ownership might be a little bit down if everyone's playing Jacquizz Rodgers too, because they'll have the running back in there and they won't want to get the passing game. That game is going to be high-paced, probably 65, 70 snaps for the Tampa offense. You're getting 35, 40 passes. And Jameis just locks in on Evans so much that he has a good chance of getting that 14, 15 target. He does a lot of the time. And also like Cameron Brate in that game too is just a cheap. If you want to double stack like John did last week with a receiver and tight end, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with his pricing, $2,900 on DraftKings.
Well, John, you are the stack king, and you got that spot in the WFFC to prove it. Give me some of your favorite stacks.
Well, it's still a bit early for me, but I think that this week, part of doing this is finding a stack that not a lot of people are going to be on. And I think this week what you're going to see is people loading up on those cheap running backs and then going with high-end stacks like Matt Ryan to Julio Jones. It's going to be very affordable. And so I'm always looking for a way that I can diversify my GPP rosters without sacrificing that upside. And, a couple that I've written down, I think Stephon Diggs has an elite matchup against the Philadelphia secondary that is just not playing well all season. They're coming he's healthy. And so I like that Sam Bradford, Stephon Diggs matchup. It's really cheap. Nobody's going to have it. And I can still build around that and not have to sacrifice anything. So that's one I'll be looking at. And then whoever the quarterback in Baltimore is, whether it's Ryan Mallett or whether it's Joe Flacco, I'll team him up with Mike Wallace against the Jets defense that's known to give up big plays. If we're going to go on that Geno Smith narrative that he's going to screw up and make mistakes, there could be some short yardage situations for the opposite team where, they pick the ball up on the Jets 20-yard line and get a quick touchdown. So those are a couple low-owned options that I think have high upside that will definitely diversify your rosters from the masses.
Devin, let's talk stacks with you.
Yeah, the one that really stands out to me, and to John's point, I'm not looking for the obvious ones. I've mentioned Brady and Gronk and Cash, and I've mentioned a couple other ones throughout the show. One that really stands out to me on DraftKings is Kirk Cousins and Pierre Garçon, especially if Jordan Reed misses. It's only going to cost you $9,600 for the two of them. So realistically, you can do whatever you want with the rest of your lineup. And looking at Garcon's history, he's been really productive when Jordan Reed has missed. We saw it last week where he had a very good game. He's had 172 yards in his last 2 games. I'm sorry. Yeah, he's in his last 3 games, he's had 172 yards. So he's seen production when Reed misses, and he's only 3,700 on DraftKings. It's a PPR site. He saw 11 targets last week. So if you can get a $3,700 receiver for 11 targets, sign me up all day.
Yeah, and we've seen probably since week 4. After that, Washington's had more of an emphasis on targeting him in the red zone and not Jamison Crowder as much. Pasquino, you got to wrap us up on the stack segment, baby. What do you got?
Yeah, I was looking at that Washington one, and I also like Crowder in that mix too. I think that triple stacking all 3 of those guys is a great option there. 2 games that haven't been looked at, and I think they're going to be lesser owned stacks. I think Marcus Mariota and Delanie Walker, who nobody's going to be on because everybody's going to be chasing the wide receivers who are not on the snaps that often. I think Mariota and Walker could be great, and then you could even play with Murray. People often avoid putting running backs with quarterbacks, but he catches a lot of balls in the backfield. But another one I really like is Jacksonville. We haven't talked much about Bortles. We mentioned him a little bit, but his receivers are solid too. Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns, both those guys are going to see a lot of targets. Again, I like that Jacksonville-Oakland game to be very high scoring. Jacksonville stack, you could even game stack it. I think that both those are very much in play this week.
Fantastic. It is the Power Grid, footballguys.com. Also part of our Audible feed as well. Our video show on our YouTube channel, footballguys.com, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. Let's get some parting thoughts, fellas, and we'll just roundtable this thing. Everyone jump in, whatever you want. Just some final thoughts. I got Devin with a big announcement after we're done, but let's just go parting thoughts. Austin, you've always got something to say, so let's have you kick us off. Everyone just jump in.
So this week is feeling very chalky to me. And I think that when it's this chalky, you have to think about how you're spending your bankroll a little bit and think about really making a definitive choice about some of these chalk plays. If you're not going to play them, you have to know that you're going to get blown away if they do well. So guys like you have to take a stand on Geno Smith, I feel like. You have to take a stand especially on Gillislee as well as Jacquizz Rodgers. If you're not playing one of those 2 guys, you better hope that they do have a terrible game. So if you don't feel confident in your choices on some of those chalk plays, then you might want to play a little less of your bankroll than you usually would. If you feel great about your choices, then go whole hog on it. Just know that that's what you're doing.
As an alternative to that, I agree. And actually, that's kind of what I was going to say, but I'll just draw on kind of your conclusions, Austin. One thing that you can do when you don't have a strong take on a guy like Gillislee, and as of Thursday night, I'm in that boat. I mean, I feel like he's the right play, but I need to do some more digging on him. I know he's got a 5.8 yard per carry average over the course of his career, but he's only got 70 carries. So how's he going to do against a Miami defense that is allowing X number of yards and so forth? If you don't have a strong take on that, what you should be doing is building multiple cash game lineups, one with Gillislee, one without Gillislee, so that you're hedging against a big day from him and yet still building a strong lineup without him in it that still has a chance of winning. And certainly, that's a strategy that more advanced DFS players will take, is to build those multiple lineups and hedge against a big day when the masses have 60% Gillislee. You can then still compete against them and have him on other rosters that it doesn't kill you.
Any narrative on this for anybody about Gillislee going against his old team, since we're talking about Gillislee? I mean, there is a bit of a revenge factor there, and I am a person who believes that narrative does belong in fantasy football analysis. Doesn't need to be everything. But we talk about Denver. I'll tell you behind the scenes, that entire team's pissed off. Every single one of them's pissed off. They've lost 2 in a row. They are going to kill Brock Osweiler. And we'll have the funeral on Tuesday. Listen, I think Gillislee against his former team, the team that said he was no good, because he's looked a lot different. As a guy that when he came out of college, Devin, maybe you'll agree, I always felt he looked like Noshawn Moreno, which is kind of a compliment. But, just kind of average slasher, decent receiver. That's what Gillislee always looked like. He's ran with more authority. He's ran with more power, more intent, more burst, more desire. He looks like a different player now. And not just now in this year. We're talking about last year as well with Buffalo. So any narrative there on that?
He's also going home to Florida. He's a Florida guy. So playing in Miami, I'm sure, means a lot to him. But the problem is, for a running back to succeed, it takes the entire offensive line to do that. It's not a wide receiver who might be one-on-one who can put a little effort into it. So I don't necessarily buy into the narratives for running backs. I buy into it a lot more for quarterbacks and wide receivers who they can feed the ball to them or look their way more. But from a running back standpoint, it takes an army basically to get behind that offensive line and find the holes. And I'm sure that the Dolphins are ready to go to stop. I'm sure they're thrilled by not playing against Shady McCoy. So I think you have to like Gillislee for other reasons than the narrative.
Pasquino, final thoughts.
Yeah, a couple things. I totally agree with Austin and John's take about the cash games and multiple lineups, but I think it's also important. Then you can also, what I call playing against yourself, because you can play tournament lineups that counter stack. You get away from the cash guys. You don't play those running backs. That's where you play the higher expensive. You start with a lineup that builds on the running backs first, so that if the running backs do tank that everybody's on, then your tournament's going to be that much higher. So that's one way. Another thing I like to do is play on multiple sites, because we talk a lot about a FanDuel where you only have 2 running backs. DraftKings allows 3. Fantasy Draft and Fantasy Aces can add up to 4. So if it's a strong running back week and you're like, how do I squeeze all these guys in? Maybe you play on the other sites where you can get 3 or 4 guys in. And one last thing, I think Dan pointed this out, where he likes to build a backup lineup. One nice way to do that on FanDuel is that there's free contests you can plug, free head-to-head for like $0. Enter one of those in, put the dummy line up there. It costs you nothing. You can always swap it out later.
Dan, you've now joined the show. What are your parting thoughts for Week 7?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting week. It almost reminds me a little bit of like an NBA week, because there's like going to be a lineup block scramble with all these injuries, where I feel like there's going to be a lot of stuff going on Sunday morning, where we're going to see is McCoy for sure out. Are some of these corners, is Jimmy Smith out? There's going to be a lot going on where, kind of like Jeff said, where you're building multiple lineups. And I don't think it's going to be one of those weeks where some weeks you feel like on Thursday or Friday, like, all right, these are the guys I'm going to play. Whereas this week I feel like there's enough moving pieces that you want to kind of wait to make that final lineup until Sunday morning, when you get some of the last minute news and inactives. So that'd be kind of my thing, just kind of build multiple lineups where you can kind of pivot quickly and kind of know in advance for, okay, if let's say, McCoy surprisingly is active, what is my backup lineup without Gillislee going to look like if I have to pivot real fast at 12:30?
And perfect segue as we talk about NBA, as we get to Devin Knotts with a very special announcement. Devin, take it away.
Yeah, so really excited to make this announcement. It's been on Twitter. It's been on the forums at Footballguys, but there will be emails for those that are on our email subscriber list. If you're not on the email subscriber list, I highly recommend you join it, because you get a ton of information, even if you're not a subscriber. But with that said, Footballguys is expanding into basketball for this year. So we are going to have daily – it's going to be focused for DFS content. We're going to be having daily articles, projections, lineup optimizers, basically anything that you want. We will have it and we're going to be 100% free up through Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving, it's a very low subscription rate. It's practically giving it away for free compared to what some of our competitors are charging. So go ahead. The season starts next week. Go ahead, check it out. Jeff and Dan are going to be doing some work for us as well. We have a staff of 15 people that are going to be focusing on NBA this year. So really excited. Go check us out for the first month. If you like it, stay on with us for the rest of the year. If not, there's no harm. There's no investment that you have to make to try out our product.
And if you love DFS, keep it going, baby. Hoops Guys. Hoopsguys.com. And that is a wrap for the Week 7 edition of the Power Grid. I'm your host, Cecil Lammy, for the amazing Austin Lee, for the judicious John Lee, for the jovial Jeff Pasquino, for the dandy Dan Hindery. Notice what I'm doing here. And for the hoops guy, the hooper, the hyper, he's protected by Viper. His name's Devin Knotts. I'm Cecil Lammy. I love Shaq Diesel, and I'm saying thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned, and as always, stay frosty, people. Yeah. Caffeine, hit yourself in the balls, like whatever you got to do, man. Like it just
Don't do that.